Welcome to HIT Podcast, HIT, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, we are dropping into your feed on Tuesdays with what I hope are bite-sized, digestible, well-curated conversations going on in the space. This week's episode will be no exception. For this week's episode, I want to circle back to an episode we did that I thought was really fitting end of year time that we called FSA Weird Purchases. It's a little bit about what the healthcare flex is, the flexible spending account. We can send this to our employees even, and sort of saying, hey, listen, if we've got an FSA plan year that runs concurrent with the calendar year, we might be bumping up against some of that use it or lose it. Now, I know grace and I know carryover and I know rollover helps mitigate, but we get into all that and we get into some fun purchases you might not have known are FSA eligible. We do mention the carryover limit in the episode, which has now gone to $660 for this year, projected to go to $680 for next year. So those limits, as mentioned, index every year, and they have gone up a skosh. Other than that, enjoy this episode. It's brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, let's get into our FSA episode for you. This week's weekly hit, we are going to cover FSA, flexible spending accounts, and specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit about the healthcare FSA. So not commuter, not dependent care stuff. We'll talk about DC FSAs in another episode, which, by the way, is another reason for you to continue to listen and follow and like and subscribe, because we'll get to those episodes down the road. But as we're coming up on the end of the year, flexible spending accounts all have that sort of use it or lose it vibe to them, right? And so if you've got a calendar year plan, you've got a calendar year flex plan, you might be coming up on the end of the year. You might be looking for some fun places to spend those dollars. So let's get into a little bit about what the healthcare FSA is, and let's talk about some cool places to spend the dollars. First of all, backing this whole thing up, a flex is basically an account where you can set aside tax-free money to go towards qualified expenses. On the healthcare FSA, those types of qualified expenses are all of your member responsibilities, right? Things like your co-pays, deductibles, co-insurances for not just medical, but for dental, for vision, for prescription, right? So employees set aside money. Employers can contribute too, by the way, but most employers don't. Just, you can if you'd like. And if you're out there and you're benchmarking and you want to be generous, you can certainly contribute to the FSA. But more often than not, this is exclusively employee money where they set aside tax-free dollars and it helps them pay for their eligible healthcare expenses, right? So if I needed to put $100 into the hand of my doctor, well, I would have had to do, $120, $130 worth of work. Uncle Sam takes his taxes out, and then I've got $100 left over, right, to put into the doctor's hand. With the flex, when you set aside $100, you get that without the taxes being taken out, right? So long story short, there's this, 20 to 30% bump in your dollars. So if you've got heavy expenses that year, right? Going into the year, the wife's 7 months pregnant, or you're going to have, orthodontics this year, or you're going to have major surgeries, you're going to have some of these healthcare expenses. It behooves you to set aside the tax-free money to spend on those sorts of things, right? And so that's what the flex is in general. Now, there's a lot of benefits to it, and employees get all of the money right up front, right? So if you're an employee and you say, hey, I'm going to set aside $100 a month, Mr. and Mrs. Employer, for the whole year, and on day one, week one, right out the gates, you have a $1,200 expense, you can use your flex card and it's going to be good for all those dollars that you've pledged. You haven't even set them aside yet, but they're there for you right off the bat, right? And so for some employers, they go, ooh, there's a little liability there, right? Because what if all my employees use funds and we have to pay that, right? The employer is going to have to, sort of front that money, but we never collected it from their paychecks. And then the employees leave and we never really get that money. You're right, Mr. and Mrs. Employer, there is that little liability. The flip side of that liability is the use it or lose it clause. And the IRS basically says, hey, this sort of nets out where, yeah, you might have some employees that, pledge FSA dollars, that spend it all and that leave, but you're also going to have employees on the other end that set aside a bunch of money. They do have it taken out. It does go into that account, but they never end up using it. And there's that use it or lose it piece, and you, the employer, are not allowed to give that back. The employer keeps it, right? So ideally, it sort of washes out. That being said, legislation has kind of come down the pike to help mitigate some of that use it or lose it, and employers have a choice between one or the other, either the carryover or the grace. As an employer, you can allow for the carryover. So the carryover is up to $610. That's today's figure, and it gets, indexed regularly per the IRS, but up to $610 that carries over from what you had in this year's election that you set aside that you maybe didn't use, and you can have it carry over into next year. Number one, what's cool about that is it does not count against the employee's maximum amount they can set aside. But you do need to be aware you have to re-elect, right? So if you took the flex in this year and you don't elect the flex for next year, there's nothing for the money to carry over into, right? There's no account. So the employee needs to, re-enroll in a flex, and then those dollars can carry over. They're spent first and they don't count against your maximum. The other option employers can have is the grace period, where you allow for 2.5 months and by the way, grace period, not to be confused with run out, because they're about to sound pretty similar, but you would allow for 2.5 months of claims to not only be funded, but incurred in, right? And claims can happen in that extra 2.5 month period. You have either the carryover or the grace. You can have the carryover and the run out, right? Where you give that extra bit of time after your plan design for employees to file claims that were incurred in the previous year, right? So we don't want to mix up the grace and the run out, because you can have, carryover and run out. You can't have carryover and grace. About 60% of employers, so if you're looking to benchmark, do the carryover. That is the more common. About 25% of employers choose the grace, and there's still about 15% of employers out there that don't choose either, right? So you can pick sort of one, the other, you can pick neither, but you do sort of want to weigh that employer liability of, hey, I funded these dollars, the employee left and never paid me back, against mitigating the use it or lose it to be a little bit more flexible for your employees, pardon the pun. But long story short, there is still aspects of use it or lose it features. So we want to let people know, where can you spend your flex dollars, right? If we're coming up on the end of the year, number one, and this is not a plug for FSAstore.com in that, I don't work with or for them or exchange money with them, but it's a cool URL. FSAstore.com is a place that has all of those unique kind of creative things that you might not have thought of or been aware of. Amazon also, by the way, does have a little kind of toggle button where you can ask it, hey, search for FSA eligible purchases. So there's some outlets for you to figure some of this stuff out. And the 2020 CARES Act, the sort of coronavirus relief legislation that was passed in 2020, made some changes too, right? Number one, feminine, kind of the monthly period stuff, that is now covered, as is PPE. So personal protective equipment like hand sanitizers, masks, those sanitizing wipes, but it also walked back the over-the-counter stuff. So allergy relief, cold medicine, Tylenol, that is now all FSA eligible, and you don't need a prescription. You don't need a letter of medical necessity. So that kind of semi-recent legislation changed what people had said for a long time as far as over-the-counter stuff. So there are some of those sort of new FSA eligible expenses, but there's also stuff that's been eligible for a while that's kind of the fun, creative stuff too. So I want to punch through a couple of the kind of less common FSA expenses here at the tail end. We talked a little bit about the sort of well-known, medical and copays, and even in the dental world, stuff like mouth guards we want to touch on, the vision world, stuff like the contact solution we want to touch on, and even, alternative care like chiropractor, acupuncture. But outside of all of that, there's things like acne treatments that people might not be aware of, sunscreen, all the air purifier sort of things, baby products, and not just like what you think of, but even baby monitors are eligible FSA expenses, which is super cool. All the kind of pregnancy, and even on the flip side of pregnancy, all the family planning, those are FSA eligible expenses. Even things like the massage guns, which are super fun and awesome, the kind of like Theragun treatments, ancestry DNA kits are eligible FSA expenses. So in doing some of the research for kind of some of the fun things that folks might not necessarily have been aware of, yeah, we know about the lip balm, we know about the glasses and the sunglasses, but baby monitors and DNA kits? And was everybody aware of the kind of CARE Act and what that did for over-the-counter prescriptions? we wanted to kind of take this time together to say, all right, number one, what is a healthcare flex? Number two, as an employer, you do have some options to mitigate that classic use it or lose it, right? You've got the carryover or the grace period. Again, the carryover is up to $610. Of course, you do still have sort of a run out period on any of these where you can file claims that were incurred in. And as we get to kind of the end of the year, we talk about incurring claims. Just want to touch upon some fun places that you can spend your flex dollars that folks might not necessarily have always been kind of readily aware of. That's all the time we have for you this week on the show. Thank you so much to our sponsors, Oura, Excel Health, TrueHue, Montage Insurance Solutions. We're blessed to be here. Thank you guys for keeping the lights on. Thank you guys for watching every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.